Hello, everyone. One of the major issues that the West faces at the moment, among many major issues, is the growth of Islam. Islam historically has been a rival tradition, rival civilization to Christendom. And we're supposed to believe in this day and age that that's all gone away due to Tony Blair and globalization, and because some music was made in the 1960s that had a sweet, if naive, sentiment. Of course, many of us have looked at Islam coming into the West and seen that it's not always rosy as we're supposed to believe. I did have countless examples to show you, but again, it just ends up eating the video alive and it goes on too long. But I think we all understand the problems with Islam. We don't have to go into that again. There are just limitless examples of being excessively aggressive, terror attacks, grooming gangs, and even just issues on the street that we're supposed to ignore. So we can pretty much jump over all of that because I take it as read, you understand the concerns. Now, we also understand that through the liberal frame, we're supposed to believe that everyone and every religion, every tradition is the same. Unless it's Western, of course. Then it's not the same, then it's bad. But in principle, whether you're a Buddhist, a secularist from South America or a Muslim, you're all basically the same. You all basically believe the same things. Of course, this isn't true at all, but this is the liberal lie, the blank slatism. It's deeply inhuman, I think, because it detaches people from their traditions and their cultures, but that's a video for another time. My point here is, when Islam doesn't act in a way which is the same as other traditions, peoples, religions, and so on, the liberal lie has to get bigger and stronger, and stranger with it too. And this is, of course, very ironic because it kind of belies that a lot of the liberals don't really get Islam. As much as they try and make out they're so pro it and it's so wonderful, they don't really understand it. I might even go as far as to say a quote-unquote evil bigot like me has a better understanding of Islam than your average liberal on the street who so vocally defends it. In reality, of course, they're not really defending Islam once you understand the liberal. They're defending their own liberal worldview through the vector of Islam. I.e., if I can find something which looks like the bad guy, it will show my virtue and my ability to step outside of myself and stand for justice. Of course, it's not really stepping outside of themselves. It's more painting themselves as saviour, as progressive moral theology. We've explored it many times. But my point here is that when it comes to Islam, many people will point out it's something of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's happy to wear the soft dress of liberalism in order to grow its influence in the Western world across the board. Cultural, educational, governmental, political. And there is an argument to that, but I'd like to stretch that out a bit more and ask a more penetrating question, which is, should we even despise the wolf? That's the implication. And of course, a wolf is dangerous, don't get me wrong, I'm not denying that. But what I'm saying here is I think sometimes by just simply painting Islam as the rival civilization, and it's made worse by the liberal system as much as they try and make it quote-unquote better, we often ignore that, I think there's good and bad in Islam that we have to acknowledge, to be fair. And what I mean is, I have a lot of ambivalence towards Islam. Yes, it's undeniable it's aggressive. Yes, it's undeniable there are endless extreme issues with Islam, grooming gangs, terror attacks, so on and so on. And yes, it's very annoying that the worse Islam behaves, the more liberals will blame us. Of course, that's a sickness of our own we've just explored. It's not necessarily Islam doing that. That's the Gary Nevilles of the world, the sort of liberal company men that will go to the bitter end with the liberal delusion. But it has to be said, despite the issues with Islam in the traditionalist school, it was famously seen as one of the few traditions that had actually somehow managed to survive a lot of the corroding effects of modernity. We don't have to go into those because we can just look at the Anglican Church to see what the corroding effects of modernity do. They take the heart and soul away from a tradition and religion, they take the sacred order away, and essentially just parrots what the regime says. So that's why the Anglican Church is increasingly, if not totally, just drowned in liberalism. Unfortunately, you can see Pope Leo moving the same way too as well, but the Catholic tradition is very big, so it's going to be very hard to completely drown Catholicism. But back to the traditionalists, Famously, René Guénon became a Muslim. He said, look, everything else is just crumbled. And it's one of the last traditions that has the living traditional spirit within. Julius Evola, who's probably the better known of the traditionalists, there's rumours that he was sympathetic to Islam. That's sort of unproven. But I think it's clear he respected Islam as he saw it having a warrior tradition. More of a solar tradition, as he would call it, a more masculine pole compared to Christianity in the West, which had become very lunar or feminine and soft and contemplative. Again, I'm not saying that it's bad to be contemplative, but I do think Evola is correct in that you do need to maintain a more masculine order to your tradition. If you don't, you tend to fall apart and be incapable of defending yourself against attacks from the world. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that there are admirable parts of Islam, and I know lots of people don't like to hear that, but I think it is true. For instance, they have an extreme loyalty to one another, the global ummah, as I think they call it. And you even see that in your day-to-day. They do stand up for one another. They might have squabbles internally, but when it comes to external, they do, most of the time, present a united front. Traditional constructs still dominate, and I know it may not be our way. I think they go too far with the women and all that sort of stuff, but they do have a gender polarity which has survived and seems to be surviving in modernity, although, as we'll explore, that could be crumbling. We have to remember, the problem is when you move away from traditional constructs is you get what we've got in the West now. You sort of just decline into total insanity, total chaos. You can't tell what a woman is. LGBTQ goes insane. That sweet spot of basically being kind to different groups, that's sort of about 1996. And then it just goes from that to just constant more madness and so on. I want to identify as, I don't know, a parrot, and if you don't let me, you're an evil bigot, that sort of thing. So again, I think, you could say Islam has tried to maintain its structure in the face of that, although it does seem to be crumbling. I think also one thing that speaks to me is there is something in Islam that they do have an intuitive understanding of something metaphysical beyond what you might call our Western obsession with rationality. I'm very into esoteric spirituality, and one thing that bugs me about mainline religion is they're always trying to justify themselves to secularists and atheists. And if you're trying to purely win on the grounds of reason, it's just an endless battle, because the great traditional truth is there are higher truths than reason alone. There are higher truths than man can fathom. That's the great mystical truth. And if you forget that and put that beneath rationality, you're going to see your tradition fall apart, which again is what's happened in the West. So again, I think that this speaks to another key element of Islam, which is perfect in symbolizing what I want to get at in this video with regards to my ambivalence towards Islam, but also I think the good and bad within Islam, and that's in the notion of jihad. Now obviously jihad's been in the news because an Islamic terrorist called Jihad decided to attack some Jews, which of course led Gary Neville to blame white middle-aged men. But the point here is that jihad, properly understood, it is this external warlike, as they would see it, sacred push for Islamic dominance. That's true. But there's also the inner jihad, and I think this is extremely important because the inner jihad is actually very spiritually powerful, and it's one of the reasons why I think Islam is maintaining itself in the fires of modernity. Just to explain it quickly, you could say something like, you have the external battles of life. We all have that. You're going to have your tradition, other traditions. You could say it's dualism, if you will. And in a sense, that's normal. You're always going to have challenges in life. But let's say your civilization, your tradition dominates. What then? And this is where, you see this a lot with, I think Peter Hitchens referenced this Russian who at the fall of the Soviet Union said to the Americans, "We've done the worst thing to you, which is deprive you of an enemy." And this is very wise, because this is classic dualistic mind-based thinking that Western man is very often trapped in. Because when you win, if you're really going to see your civilization flourish, you need to be able to go on the inner journey and start to face the real battle of life, which is overcoming yourself and your limitations as a human. You move from the human aspect to the being aspect in religious language. Now, whether you like Islam or not, that's what the inner jihad is pointing towards. And I think that's respect-worthy, personally. Now, I'm not saying they all act like that. They certainly don't. But there is something there in their tradition which allows your tradition to flourish when you win. Because if you don't have it, you're just going to have to find a new enemy on the external plane. And this, of course, is what 1984 is all about. We're constantly creating enemies. You have to go and have your, 10 minutes of hate and so on. Because, again, the system has to make you hate someone in order to maintain its own authority. Because that's a false worldly authority. And again, this is why the spiritual overcoming is so vital in terms of civilizational growth, why I also believe, incidentally, it's vital for the future. But the point I'm making here is that, again, you do need to have that path of real growth that takes us beyond the dualistic. And actually, that is in Christianity. It's been completely destroyed. But that path is in the esoteric Christian tradition. It's also in what you might call the narrow way or the sacred way. It's why I called the sister channel the sacred way, because I'm very much aiming at that. But it is true that you don't find it much in the mainstream church. It was largely destroyed after the advent of modernism. And modernism, as I've said before, it's basically the advent of rationality, i.e. the human mind can figure everything out. If we can't figure everything out by reason, then it's just nonsense. And this has led to scientism in the modern world. The Richard Dawkins view, everything must be worked out through a test tube. But as Scruton so beautifully said, brain scans can't tell us what love is. He's talking to a much more transcendent spiritual realm, which makes the civilization. I think that's also, I would say, when we look at our nation and the beauty therein, there is a spiritual aspect to it which goes beyond reason and makes the magic of England, if you will. That's a bit of a side issue, but hopefully you get what I'm pointing to. So my point is that, again, you do need to have this path, and if you don't, you will be eaten alive. Now, again, Islam is in a battle for that at the moment because obviously it's become very ugly with the external jihad and it's very misdirected and so on. But the real question is, can Islam really survive modernity? Islam is younger than Christianity, so you could say Christianity is in a death cycle right now. Again, in traditional language, death doesn't mean dying and gone. It means death and to be reborn in a new form. Islam seems to be almost peaking and coming down a touch to me. And that's because it's just so entwined with materialism now, and even liberal ideology. And you really see this in this silly phrase, Islam is a religion of peace, which really comes from the liberal world, not the Muslims. But the Muslims, stupid and modernist as they are, take it on board. And it's a deep betrayal of the Islamic tradition. Not only is it untrue, because, of course, it's clear that Islam has a warrior tradition. I mean, what about Saladin? That was what he was famous for, the battles between Saladin and Richard, the Christian knight versus the Muslim Saracen. And it was clear with the growth of Islam that, they did grow by the sword. They had powerful armies, they had a warrior tradition. Now, again, I'm not saying that as, bad Islam, aren't you evil? I'm saying that as, well, look, you'll find this in traditions. They tend to have a warrior tradition. A warrior tradition isn't evil. It can become evil, no doubt about that, as we've seen, but it's not evil in and of itself. It can be actually very noble, which is why Saladin and Richard had great respect for one another. I think Saladin looked down on the Europeans until Richard came along, and he viewed him very much as this incredible warrior, big, strong guy, noble, brave, courageous, with all of the energy of a knight. And remember, the knight is the spiritual warrior with the physical warrior combined. That's why they're noble. I think even when Richard was unwell, Saladin sent him his personal physician and some fruit, which goes to show how highly he thought of him. There was great respect between the two warriors. But the point I'm making here is that's a tradition that's noble, and it's being completely eroded, one, by the actions of these nutty radical Islamists, but two, by the appeasement of liberalism. Oh, no, we're soft, we're sweet too, Now, you could say, again, it's wolf in sheep's clothing stuff, they're just saying it, but I think many of them do seem to believe it. And the problem is that you're betraying your tradition to fit it into the liberal conception of what it thinks traditions and religions should be, i.e. defanged and toothless. And this is exactly what's happened to Christianity, as we well know now. Christianity is, quote-unquote, meek and mild. They don't really understand the depth of the Christian tradition, but they want to emphasize the loving teachings of Jesus, which focus on compassion rather than challenge and growth, in order for it to fit in to the blank slate liberalism of the age, basically. Now, again, this is very dangerous because it destroys your tradition, number one, but it also leads, in my view, to mass cruelty. One of the sort of classic motifs you'll find throughout, traditional understanding, spiritual understanding, and the growth in masculine initiation is it's the weak man that's actually the most cruel man, and that's because they actually can't stand up to the challenges of life, so they want to undercut them, and they become aggressive and untrustworthy and too weak to deal with things, so they become always cowardly and conspiratorial, rather than being brave and forthright like Saladin and Richard. So my point is, what we're seeing here is, again, the attempted defanging of Islam that's been done to Christianity. And I don't know if many Muslims are really wise enough to see this is happening, because you get lots of trinkets and prizes for going along with the liberal regime. Oh, you're such a poor victim group. Oh, you poor things. What's that going to do? That's going to destroy the warrior ethic, the masculine pole in your religion that people like Evola, the traditionalists, respected, and Nietzsche actually respected. You see this in, they have this Tel Mama thing. It's like this, Muslim thing where they can complain if some guy has shouted, you're a Muslim dickhead to them. They can make up and say, I'm so oppressed. And again, look, this is soft energy. This isn't the great warrior ethic that Islam is supposed to have in. And it's a sign, again, of the decline we're witnessing as Islam interacts with modernity. But more importantly, the engine of Islam is the Middle East. And although you might say the Middle East is much more firm in its interpretation of Islam and holds the tradition of Islam in a very firm manner, which it still does, to be fair, you can see the cracks starting to form. Saudi and UAE are big examples here, Saudi especially. They're now trying to balance Islamic tradition and money power. But, as the Bible teaches, you cannot serve two gods. You'll only end up serving one. And to my mind, unless you have extreme spiritual poise and wisdom, you won't be able to dance with the devil in the market. You will be overcome by the temptations of the world. And I think we're already seeing that. Money can corrupt anyone, especially when you have lots of it. And Islam, its attitude historically, was just to defend itself from the temptations of the world by just not seeing them, by blocking them out. That's the niqab, completely blocking the woman so she can't be seen, so the sexual temptation doesn't exist. Again, it might go a bit far for me. I get what they're trying to do, but it goes a bit far. But the point is, again, if you're letting the market in, especially with the power Saudi has, you're going to see it corrupt you. For instance, Saudi, like all of Islam, is supposed to be Sharia compliant against usury. But if you've got the amount of money they have and you're involved in the market they have, and the global market now, you are blurring the line into sinful practices. There are all sorts of things and tricks they're trying to pull to allow some form of usury that isn't called usury. And that's dangerous, because remember, I don't know if you know, but the last speech by Muhammad was actually against usury. So it's a strong sin in the Islamic tradition, and you can see how the market, given its nature, will start to get you. On top of that, you're seeing Saudi try to modernize, bringing in sports, comedians, Western culture. Dubai, you can even get hookers and drugs in the black market, apparently. So again, you can see this influence is coming in. And I'm not saying it's all falling apart. I'm saying you're just seeing the cracks of Western influence come in bit by bit. Of course, you have the Muslims in the West as well. We've all seen their behaviour. A lot of them drink, chase women. In the more appalling circumstances, they're chasing girls. Although, to be fair, there's also a strong tribal and racial element to that. Mainly it's being Pakistanis and Bangladeshis more than broad Muslims. But anyway, my point is, you can see the corrosion occurring across the board, and you can see, okay, Christianity's been through this, Are you going to be able to bear it and survive? Because a lot of Muslims talking tough online. We're a growing tradition, more and more Muslims every day. Yeah, but what's becoming of Islam? I mean, look what's happened to the Anglican Church. You think these things can't fall apart? They very much can, and we're in an era of deep corrosion. The temptations of modernity are vast, and many Muslims are going for them. So again, my other point here is this, paradoxically, while things look terrible for the West and our tradition, you do think, on the plus side, we're dead. And remember, when I say dead, that's not necessarily dead and finished in the traditional context. It means you're at the end of the cycle, or at least coming to it. And I think we pretty much are. I mean, you're seeing this everywhere. People are craving their tradition to spring back. They would love to see a strong, virtuous, brave Christianity with a masculine warrior tradition, a contemplative tradition, loyal to the family, loyal to Christendom. But of course, we're not getting that because the church is so corroded. But what my point is that it's like the preconditions are being set for a reawakening. Now, again, it seems to me that Islam is just not in that state right now. It is more at a point where it's peaking and arguably starting to go over the edge into decline. So, in the next few decades, 50 years or so, there could be a shift back round. I'm not saying it's certain, but there could be when you look at how things are actually developing. And again, we can go back to the traditionalists themselves. They were very clear that the only way for the West to truly meaningfully survive was to have a reinvigorated tradition. I don't think you can really read too much into Evola because he was more sympathetic to sort of Roman paganism and so on, and viewed Christianity as too lunar, too feminine, too contemplative. Whereas Guénon wasn't quite the same as that. I'm more affiliated with Guénon in the way I think about the world, but he was very clear that Christianity, specifically Catholicism, in his view, would be the only way, but it would have to be revitalized. He said it would have to have Eastern influence. I think we've already seen that happen. So many people are understanding spirituality from an Eastern context and bringing it back into the West. So we're deepening our understanding, especially when it comes to mystic and non-dual understanding. But with that, of course, what the mystic and the non-dual lacks is the formal practical application of sacred order, which Christianity can provide if it can be reawakened. At the moment, we have the sacred order of Christianity, but no spirit behind it. So liberalism is just dominating. But I'd also add as well that there needs to be this mass awakening that goes on in the church, which brings back the divine masculine wisdom. I've spoken about it many times. My experience in London, a meditation class with all these hippies or liberal types. Crazy guy comes in, 6'4", straight out of jail, he's free to attend, intimidates the women. All this lovey-dovey talk about peace in the spirit goes out the window because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to deal with a nutter. And it's left to me and this old man, my first session, and this old guy, about 80, to say, can you not come back next time because the women are frightened? The guy was all right about it in the end, but as I say, the lesson was, look, it's all well and good to have the contemplative tradition, but if you don't have the strong masculine, everything that comes in is just going to attack you and eat you alive. That's why you need the warrior tradition. And again, the Stasi and all of these evil folks out there that want to manipulate what I'm saying, I'm not saying warrior just attack people. That's not the point. It's a noble warrior tradition that allows you to fight the sacred holy battle, the battle of justness, of virtue. That's the reality of life. You need to have that, otherwise you're going to get beaten badly. So anyway, the point I'm making here is the preconditions are there for the West to have a new future, and it will be a big inner revolution, I think. It will be chaotic, it will be difficult, it will be challenging, but it does depend upon Western men returning to tradition, returning to the spirit, understanding what it is in as deep a context as they possibly can. And while Islam, has its influence on the West, that will be a way that we can counter that, but also maybe even see it go the wrong way because we've learned the lessons. It's just learning now. So again, this is, I think, my big hope for the future. I don't think it's pie in the sky thinking. I think there is real, deep traditional worth in there and value, but we have to be careful. We have to be wise. We have to be deeply spiritually embedded. We have to understand our tradition well and other traditions around the world as well, and get that true light coursing through us once more. That will act as the engine that drives the civilization forward. Of course, this is very much my mission, as I say, on the sister channel, The Sacred Way. Do check that out down below in the description. I also do a course, a 30-day regeneration for men. You can check that out down below. It's called Daily Disciplines. It's on the Substack. Just go to the Substack and have a look. And of course, join the Substack if you'd like to join the monthly conversations, the exclusive content, and just to support me and my mission. And do subscribe to this channel if you're new. Other than that, thanks for listening. Enjoy the rest of your day. And peace be with you, friends.